Okay, so my name is Sherritt. I am Director of Programs with Foresight Canada. I'm delighted to be your host today for Climate Connections, our mining edition. I would love to see a sign of life from people. So give me a wave or an emoji on Zoom if this is your first time to a Climate Connections event. Yeah, okay, lots of new people. What about a wave or an emoji if you've been to one of these before, another edition of Climate Connections? Okay, I think it's lots of new people. Great. So I've said my name. I'll be your host for today. We've got an incredible lineup of speakers and also a group of partners that we'll run through some introductions and we promise we'll be concise. So I'm going to say a little bit more about Foresight Canada shortly, but I will start with an acknowledgement of the people and the lands across Canada. If we want to move forward, Astrid. So Foresight Canada works across Canada, or what we call Canada, Ontario Island. And so we always begin every event, even virtual events, with an acknowledgement of the land that we are on. So the First Nations people of this land where I am. So I'm on unceded Coast Salish territories, just looking out at the ocean here. I always do that on the lands of the Comox people on Vancouver Island. But we work across Canada. And so we want to acknowledge the traditional, ancestral, and in some cases, unceded territories of the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. We as Foresight also acknowledge that, like, given the kind of change-making nature of our work, we have much to learn from Indigenous peoples who have stewarded this land since time immemorial. So we kind of invite everybody always to take a minute and pause and reflect upon that, given the nature of our work. And welcome. And if you want to say hi in the chat and where you are, that'd be awesome to see too. So for those that are new to Foresight Canada, maybe if we just go forward one more slide, Astrid, and then I'll go back. So we have a very bold vision, and that is that Canada is the first G7 country to reach net zero. We know that we need to rapidly launch and commercialize and scale climate solutions in order to transition. And we focus on acceleration, adoption, and ecosystem building in order to do that. We do this in collaboration with what we call our Helix 5. So you can see those kind of different groups and sectors, hence us asking about that in starting on our slide there. And our Climate Connections event series, we kind of see it as an example of trying to unite people from, in this case, industry, academia, and innovators. You kind of get a sense of what we're doing, especially in this realm of ecosystem building. So that's a little bit about us. I'm going to leave it there. Please chime in if you have questions in the chat, or reach out to Nisha or Astrid from my team if you have questions about Foresight. But we're actually going to go back one slide. Sorry, Astrid, I went out of order. I'm just going to say a little bit about our agenda. So I'm saying more about Foresight. We also want to thank and acknowledge our partners at IRAP. So we're going to hear from Rob McGarry, who's going to give a little intro to a new program with IRAP. Also entrepreneurship at UBC, and Shannon Bard's going to say hello. We will then shift to introductions from our experts panel. So he'll hear a little bit from Liz, Jan, and Al. And then we'll do what we call reverse pitches, and I'll say more about what that is. So we'll have a bit of space to hear from each person, a chance for questions in a larger group, and then we'll have some really quick breakout rooms. So for those of you that want to connect more with each of our speakers, that's your opportunity too. And we're going to end at the top of the hour. So that's our plan for today. It'll be speedy, I bet. And moving right along, yeah, we have a special guest today. So our partners at IRAP, we wouldn't be able to do most of our work without NRC IRAP. Thanks so much to our partners. And Rob McGarry is a program advisor to the international team at NRC IRAP, and he's going to say a bit about their programming. So over to you, Rob.
Great. Thanks a lot, Shay, and thanks for having me. As you mentioned, I'm with NRC. I'm with the international team. We're going to talk about this global co-innovation for clean tech. We call it the GCCP program that we're actually launching through Foresight in, I believe, in April of this year. Let's go to the next slide. Thanks. As everyone knows, if you're a Canadian company, you've got to grow beyond the Canadian market. We all know that. It's pretty straightforward. The traditional way, of course, is to find customers or a sales channel internationally. But another way to look at it is to actually do a co-development or a co-innovation with a partner in the market that you're targeting. And you can both bring together a bigger, more comprehensive solution and then go globally together. So that's what the international team at IRAP does, is to enable those kind of partnerships and development. Next slide. So, in a nutshell, in the last 10 years, we've supported over 500 Canadian SMEs, $160 million in funding, 35 countries, and it's growing every year, getting larger and larger. Typically, it's about $40 million a year now is the budget to co-fund projects with our partners in these target economies. Next. And we've done our, we've been doing it long enough to look at the numbers, and our data shows that co-innovation enables new jobs, increase in revenue. We even compared our internal clients that have taken part in these global innovation funded projects tend to grow faster than those that did not. Next slide, please. The type of partners, typically it's with SMEs in another country, but we also have larger consortium projects that we back, which will involve sometimes MNEs as well as universities and research institutes, locally and globally. And I'll just present a really simplified view of a co-innovation journey for a company, because this is where it'll show where this program sits in. Next. So we have three different areas. We call it the assess, the connect, and execute. Assess is where a company kind of looks at themselves, see if they're ready for a co-innovation journey, maybe decide whether it's something they want to do or not, and then what stages or what steps they need to do to prepare for that. The next phase is to connect, to actually go and meet with potential partners, go to certain events, do matchmaking events. And then execute are the actual projects that we fund through various partners, Eureka, Eurostars, and a lot of bilateral agreements that we've set up. The Global Innovation Clean Tech Program, the GCCP, that will be going through Foresight, connects on mostly in the assess area, but also there's some funding that we provide as a result of that program for you to start making your connections for your co-innovation. So again, the mission of this is really just to provide financial support and advisory services to help companies that have decided they want to go this route to put together a plan to enable it to happen. Next slide. So the GCCP program comes in two parts. One or two half-day virtual workshops where a client will sit down with their lead ITA from IRAP and also work with the hosts, in this case Foresight, to put together a plan. You put together an international action plan, help you identify the type of attributes that you look for in a partner. If you already have a partner, then what you can do to take the next step in that relationship. And you, at the end of the workshop, your plan is reviewed and is pitched. The second part then is you actually execute the plan. You get up to $30,000 from IRAP to do the steps that you need to kind of establish partnerships or take them further into the markets that you're interested in. Next slide. This is, I won't go through the whole list here, but this just give an idea of the kind of activities that are supported, market studies, competitive analysis, travel, and a lot of things that you need to either establish a new partnership, to seek out a new partnership, or take a partnership you already have further towards eventually doing a co-innovation project. And what do you need to participate? Well, you need to be a growing IRAP client. If you're not an IRAP client and you're a technology company in the clean tech sector, I encourage you to get in touch with IRAP and start becoming that process. Get an ITA, and once that process is started, then you can take advantage of this as well as many other programs that are related to IRAP support. Also, we want you to be planning to expand globally. Maybe you're looking for a co-innovation partner to develop a complete solution together. We need you to be sufficiently resourced, so you need to be able to keep your business running and also do this at the same time. And also, ideally, you have 7 to 10 employees and some revenue and already have a product that's selling at least in one market. So the activity here is not typically finding a product market fit in general, but finding a way to get into a global market. We have an internal program here that we've been offering since 2018. We've helped about 100 SMEs across the country with about $3 million in funding, and a lot of them have gone on to become successful applicants for larger projects. We're now looking to expand through partners like Foresight to give a clean tech focus on this program and bring it to a larger audience and increase the funding. And I think that might be the last slide. So the next steps, if you're interested in this, loop back with Foresight, take a look at what's the information for their next cohort. Again, if it turns out you're not an IRAP client, you feel you might be IRAPable, as we call it, then feel free to reach out to me. and I can connect you with the intake process that needs to happen for you to get on there. Even if in the end you don't choose this route, you can certainly benefit from IRAP's other support just for local developments that you're working on right now. And that's it.
Nice. Thanks so much, Rob. I've heard about the program, but it's nice to hear it from you.
Here's some numbers, by the way. These are extra slides if you want to see them, but this is the impact it has. So
great.
It can be quite, yeah. Okay.
Great. And I will use iWrappable in future.
iWrappable, yeah, it's a new, they're shreddable. If you go to shred with CRA, you can be shreddable. And now we're iWrappable. Okay. So it's a new verb.
Great. Love it.
Yeah.
You can also email my team at programs@foresightcac.com and we'll get you connected. Thanks, Rob. Moving right along, I'm going to introduce Shannon Bard. So Shannon is an executive in residence in EIR with Foresight, also a professor at UBC and lead of the Climate Venture Studio at UBC. Shannon and my VP, Stephen Wilson, started Climate Connections, the event series. So Shannon's going to say a little bit more about UBC and maybe also a little bit of context on where this event comes from. Shannon, over to you.
Absolutely. Thanks very much, Shay. So I'm not actually a tenure track professor. I used to be. So now what I focus on is I lead something called the Climate Venture Studio at Entrepreneurship at UBC. And I think we have another slide that comes up after this, so we can move to the next slide. So this entrepreneurship program that we have at UBC, when the climate emergency was declared by the University of British Columbia 3 or 4 years ago, we wanted to have a substantive response to that. And so we developed this very hands-on climate venture studio out of this need to try to see what the university could do to address the climate emergency. And the real issue was that right now there's a 30-year time span between invention in the laboratory and adoption in society. And that's unacceptable if we actually want to respond in a timely manner. So our thought is, don't expect the same outcome. If we want to continue to have the same behaviors, let's see what we can do differently to have a different outcome. And so the focus of the Climate Venture Studio is to have a different pathway to accelerate actually bringing climate solutions to market and to scale and to get adoption in society. And so one of the deficiencies that we saw was that often within an academic network, it can be really challenging if you don't know any industry folk to really, one, have an understanding about whether the invention that's really dear to your heart, whether it solves an urgent problem and a timely problem that others really care about. Meaning, is there actually a market for it? Will anyone actually pay you for this? Is the timing right? And so that was one of the reasons why we teamed up with Foresight to develop these reverse pitch events, so that there would be an opportunity, one, to hear from experts across different fields about what some of the urgent pressing questions are, but then to have a chance for our entrepreneurs and our scientists to ask questions about and to sort of probe more deeply around customer discovery, to really understand what are the needs of industry and what are the needs of the market, so we can really pair the technology that's being developed towards what the market demand is. And so that's why we've sort of developed these pieces. I think there's maybe one last slide so we can move forward to. And really what our focus on here is we not only have climate ventures as a studio, but health ventures and social ventures. And so we're looking at ways, again, that we can accelerate making impact and we can bring a community together. So we're really happy to be working with our partner Foresight on this work. And we have another opportunity where we match with EIRs that are in Foresight for some of our teams to take advantage of the accelerator training that's offered by Foresight as well. So we're very grateful for that. So thank you so much, Shay. I hand it back over to you.
Thanks, Shannon. Great to partner up on Climate Connections. And yes, we're going to tell you about our energy edition that's coming up next month. So I think in the interest of time, I'm just going to quickly introduce our speakers, and then I'm going to launch into it with our reverse pitches, starting with Liz, if that's all right, folks. So moving along, we have Liz Lepin, Al Shep, and Jan Smit. So Liz is the CEO of Common Good Mining and a director at the Battery Metals Association of Canada. Welcome, Liz. Next, we have Al Shep. So Al is the executive director of IMII, the International Minerals Innovation Institute, based in, I was going to say Saskatoon, and now I'm worried that it's Regina, Saskatoon.
Saskatoon, correct.
Yes. And Jan Smit, director of technology innovation at Sherritt International Corporation. Welcome, Jan. So we've given each of our speakers a pretty tall order to describe a challenge, what we call a reverse pitch, in 3 to 5 minutes. And so we're going to hear from each speaker, present a challenge. In some cases, I've challenged them to frame it in a how might we statement, but we'll see how we go. And then I might ask a couple questions and follow up. And I'm also going to invite you, audience, to share your questions in the chat. And depending on time, we might actually ask you to share your questions out loud too and have a little bit of a discussion. So we'll take about half an hour for this, I think. And then depending on time and interest, we can jump into breakout rooms for direct connecting and follow-up conversations. But we'll see how we go. So first up, Liz, can you share a bit about your challenge?
I sure can. Hi, everybody. It's great to meet you. Liz Lappin. My background is geology. I've been working in the natural resources sector for a couple of decades in oil and gas, geothermal, critical minerals. Common Good, just as a quick intro, is a company based in BC. We're focused on developing critical minerals projects in partnership with communities. We're also a social enterprise. And that means that we have the dual objective of a social environmental impact and financial return. So sometimes this is called a blended value. And then BMAC, the Battery Metals Association of Canada, is an industry association dedicated to developing a domestic circular battery value chain all the way from mining through to end user recycling. So I can sort of bring both of those hats into the conversation, whatever's required. But the reverse pitch or the challenge that I'll be articulating today has to do with common good and small scale mining. So we have a portfolio of exploration stage projects that we are aiming to bring in production with this process we call tiny mining, which is essentially small scale mining. And it's notably different than artisanal mining. I want to differentiate that because artisanal mining has really serious health, safety, and environmental impacts. It's an informal type of mining. What we're talking about is a formalized mining that is regulated and uses high-tech equipment. There's plenty of small-scale mines in South America, but it's relatively common in North America, where we tend to really emphasize the large-scale capital projects and economies of scale in mining. So to give you a sense of the difference in scale, there's, a typical mine might be hundreds of millions of dollars in CapEx, capital expenditure to get up and running. We're more on the order of tens of millions and processing orders of magnitude less ore on a daily basis. So why small scale mining when we need supply so urgently? I can get into the weeds a little bit later, but ultimately, I believe that small scale mining offers us this sort of agile framework to try new approaches and in mining that are too risky for the large scale projects. So this would ultimately unlock supply that would be overlooked by the traditional model, because a large scale miner wouldn't go after something that's too small. But it also has the opportunity to unlock opportunities that are a bit more socially complex. And then we can take these lessons and we can apply them at larger scales. So with respect to the challenge of small scale mining is really about how to develop mines with a really, really small footprint. And so we're looking at bringing in modular, flexible equipment, things like the typical mining equipment, ore sorting units, grinding flotation circuit screens, drill mining processes. We need to have these at a smaller scale. We need to design them to be circular with feedback loops that recover water, reagents. We also want to make sure that we're minimizing waste by being really clear about where the ore body is so that we're only mining the ore and not mining waste that we ultimately have to deal with at the back end with a tailings management system. And then there's other things to bring in like electrification to reduce emissions, and then bringing everything together with something software enabled that's leverages machine learning and automation. So, the how might we question is how might we do small scale mining in a way that is, environmentally sensitive, depending on the local area, but also in a way that is holistic. And so, I'm kind of bringing in, there's this element of clean tech, but there's also elements of tiny mining that is social innovation. And when you bring the clean tech and the social innovation together, it's a whole business model innovation. We don't always talk about this in mining, but it's really about like a holistic approach that puts the community at the center of the mining activity. And what could that look like? This is a model that's increasingly popular in renewables. And so we want to sort of bring that into mining and really combine all of those elements to do mining in a good way. So I'm hoping to hear from folks today about all the solutions that they're working on to make mining better and more efficient and more clean, and as well any ideas in the social innovation space to really increase and improve the role of communities as we develop metals for decarbonization. I don't know if that was 5 minutes.
No, it's great. Yeah, about 5. Yeah. A couple questions from me, and then, as I said, feel free to add your questions in the chat. Folks might also ask Shannon if she has any questions to prime us up. So I guess first question would be, like, do you know of others, either locally, internationally, that are working on this challenge, if we call it tiny mining or small scale mining, and other kind of, I guess one, and a related question would be like an example of a approach that's working.
So I could probably count on one hand the number of mining social enterprises there are.
Yeah.
There's one called Regeneration, and it came out of an NGO called Resolve that is in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
Cool thing about that project was that they started off with the end user. So they started off with companies like Apple and Tiffany, who are consumers of gold in their products. And they got some initial buy-in and investment from them. And then they went off and they found an old gold project that was a placer gold, which means you're mining gold from the river, kind of panning. And this project had essentially destroyed salmon habitat, and it had been kind of left behind. So they went off and they developed a relationship with the First Nation. They developed a plan to remine that area, redistribute tailings in a safe and good way, restore the salmon habitat. It's called the Salmon Gold Project, and it was done by Resolve and another company called Shiona Metals. And now this particular Salmon Gold Project has been in Apple Sustainability Report for 3 years in a row. And I think it's a real standout because it really highlights how we can think about mining in different ways. When we ask the question, how do we regenerate the land while we mine? It's sort of a different take on how we might normally approach things. And so they've had a lot of traction, and so they're a real inspiration to us to whether it's a remining opportunity or a greenfield mining opportunity, kind of bringing all these different pieces together.
Mm-hmm. And we talked in prep for this about the kind of, how do you, like, the economic or business case or lack thereof in some of these cases. And so it's cool to hear of an example. It sounds like they got strategic partners or kind of got buy-in early on from, you said Tiffany, and I can't remember the other example. Yeah, interesting to hear. And then another one from me. Oh yeah, Shannon, go for it.
Oh, sorry. So Liz, this is great to hear about this. So I used to be the global director of innovation for a global mining engineering company, an environmental assessment company. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about the role of these consulting and engineering and environmental assessment groups. Because often the approach that we use, these were for larger projects, but the approach that we use, I think, is aligned with what you're sort of proposing here, was that the first step in moving forward with a mine project is you need to get your permit, you need to get your environmental assessment approved. And the approach we used that I led was, let's look at what the conventional approach is and what are the impacts of that. And now we're going to approach something that looks at what are the social benefits, that looks at approaches that are going to minimize the environmental costs, and what is the capacity building that's going to happen in the community, and try to show the quantitative increase in value by using a more innovative approach. So I'm curious if you might be able to talk a little bit about the role of these consulting companies that often are doing the facilitation. They'll do the engagement with the First Nations on behalf of the mining company. In some cases, the mining company will hold that relationship themselves. They'll do the communication with the government regulators, and they will be commissioning sort of the subcontracting of any innovative startups that might be putting the solutions in place, and whether the model that I have in mind, which is for a bigger company, actually goes out the window. And when you're working on smaller sites, you can be more nimble and quick. Maybe you can sort of address that so that the entrepreneurs that we have in the audience can sort of think about, do they need to work through a facilitator like a consulting company, or can they go direct to the mining company?
Yes, it was super unhelpful. First comment is right. For common good, our approach is we are talking to the community ourselves, and that's because we really value the development of trust. We believe that there are impacts in mining, and as you articulated, right, there's a lot of different positive and negative opportunities for impact. And we believe that that's going to be very unique to this specific community. And the only way we can really, truly develop something that has impacts that are meaningful to the community and positive for the community is if we develop that trusting relationship. And so I'm not sure if that relationship can be outsourced to consulting companies or not. I think that we have to try different things. But I think that any community and company that want to work together, it's ultimately going to be an ecosystem of players. And so I think that part of what the Tiny Mining platform offers us an opportunity to do is invite more people into an ecosystem of folks that are looking for new ways of doing things. And one of the sort of sets of expertise that the consulting firms have is how mines develop now. What works now? What mines were shelved after $400 million of investment, and why? And so, with that sort of level of expertise, that's useful to communities and companies who are kind of weaving their way through these processes. But, we're engaging, for example, with consultants because, especially on the regulatory side, because we really want to get ahead of things like environmental baseline monitoring. But we are also doing that at the pace of trust that as it's developed with communities.
So then for our entrepreneurs that we have in the audience, then for an organization like yours, your organization would be the point of contact for them to discuss with you whether they had a solution rather than having to go through an intermediary like a consulting company.
Yes, for us, for sure. We're a relatively small company, so that definitely. I'd be interested in hearing Jan's thoughts on what the point of entry is there. So maybe we can invite him to answer that question too, because I think it will be different depending on the size and style of mining company.
Jan, would you like to share your thoughts?
Sorry, you caught me unawares.
Sorry.
Yeah, struggling with the mouse. I will actually touch on a lot of the elements of the discussion in my pitch of a challenge. And the scale, the critical minimum economic scale, is definitely a problem space that we think about a lot right now in the mining industry. And there's a distinct mismatch between the expectations of the consumers of the critical minerals and the ability of the producers to deliver on that, both in scale and in cost and in timelines.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jan. Just getting going, digging into discussion, I realize, but I'm going to move us along to Al. And then what will happen is we'll come back to some of these topics. There was a question that was posed in the chat, Liz, if you wanted to chime in there, or it might just be a topic for conversation. Have you looked into the economics of tiny mining? I know you have, but it's a big conversation. Okay, next, Al Shep, can you chime in on your challenge? Over to you.
Sure. Thank you, Shay, and hello everyone from Saskatoon. Again, I'm Al Shep. I'm the executive director of a group out here called the IMII. We're an innovation supporting network for Saskatchewan's minerals industry, just predominantly the world leading potash industry and the second largest uranium industry. Challenge I'm going to speak to is related to applying carbon capture, use, and storage in mining. It is one of the two possible pathways our industry is examining with respect to getting to a net zero future. If we continue to use hydrocarbons, which is in the potash sector, predominantly natural gas, we use that for steam generation and product drying. Of course, need some way to deal with the emissions that come out of it. The challenge we've identified is not necessarily with respect to carbon capture per se, even though I do think some more work is required on the technology front there. Sequestration, we have lots of experience in Saskatchewan on that front. We think pipeline can be solved. So the issue we flagged, wanted to raise with people is that we've identified a need for innovative sequestration or utilization technologies that don't rely on indefinite monitoring to ensure there's no release of captured carbon. Of course, the purpose of monitoring is to identify possible movements of CO2 that may lead to the release of CO2 into the atmosphere. Right now, there's a mental model that monitoring would possibly continue for decades to confirm surrounding areas unaffected and CO2 safely contained in storage. So, we're looking for alternatives on that front. There appear to be three types that are under development around the world, which may need either more research and or more effort at scaling them up so they can be demonstrated and ultimately deployed. There's biological carbon sequestration. People are looking at how effectively we can store carbon in vegetation, grasslands, forests, soils, oceans even. There's geological carbon sequestration again, which may create the issue for the indefinite monitoring, but people are looking at, can you sequester carbon in rocks, not just in underground geologic formations. And then there's potential for technological carbon sequestration, where we can maybe bind carbon up using innovative technologies, produce new materials or new products, or even use the carbon as a resource. Already works underway with related to graphene production, methanol fuels, carbon nanofibers, nanotubes, bioplastics, concrete mixing, corrosion coatings, paints. There's a variety of things in play, but those generally don't exist yet in ways that can be readily deployed by our industry at the scale we need. And if you look ahead for the minerals industry, which has a challenge related to its heat sources, not all the technologies that we think we may need to achieve net zero exist. I think it's already mentioned by my colleague from Sherritt, the solutions we're looking forward to coming out of innovators are ones that are economic, commercially available at scale, and they have to be able to fit into the industrial processes. So that's our need related to carbon capture, use, and storage, and appreciate the chance to engage with you through Foresight to see if some innovative ideas come forward.
Thanks, Al. Building on a couple of the last points, I know we talked in prep about the kind of unique challenges and unique situation, like regionally in Saskatchewan, and I'm wondering if you can expand upon that, because you noted kind of some misconceptions that often happen for innovators that pitch to you, or.
Yeah, and so everyone's benefit, the potash uranium industry in Saskatchewan is, some people say, already where a lot of the rest of Canada's mining minerals industry wants to be, in that we're already predominantly electric. Stats may be a little old, but on balance, Canada's metals industry is 65% hydrocarbon, 35% electric. We are the other way. We're more than 65% electric already. We are not substantial users of diesel. Less than small fraction of 1% of our emissions are associated with diesel. So again, our challenge is maybe slightly different than others because of the degree of we've already electrified. But that still means, from a heat perspective, our challenge is, what do we do if we're going to continue using fossil fuel for a source of industrial heat, which is actually, in many ways, the dominant challenge facing industry around the world, is the use of fossil for heat. And if we're going to continue to burn fossil fuels, how do we capture, how can we utilize that or sequester it in a way that really does contribute to net zero for us.
Thanks for that context. And your point about monitoring, Michelle from UBC is asking in the chat, just to reiterate. So is it the challenges CSIS technology without long-term monitoring? Can you speak to that a little bit more?
Yes, yeah, the no industry likes to look at a future of indefinite liability. So the industry's interest is to see if there are technologies that may allow us to, again, utilize the captured storage in a way that doesn't create long-term monitoring requirements or store it. I see someone flagged in here that carbon capture using mine tailings, that depends on the tails and the chemistry that's available for sequestration, binding the carbon up in the mineral form. And from the bits I've looked at it, we don't have the type of deposits that are today readily have that technology available to us. Our potash tails are salt, and our uranium tails are, again, also I understand just geochemically sort of aren't aligned to that purpose. We certainly have watched what's been going on with the X Prize challenge, because we're also not the only industry looking at what do we do with the carbon we capture.
Mm-hmm. Feel free to chime in, Shannon. Great points you're making there. If you have a question or a comment for.
I was just going to add on to Al's comment that, of course, not all mine tailings have the mineral profile to facilitate this kind of carbon capture and the formation of carbonates that form a rock. The one that's being used by Arca Carbon, which is the startup that came out of UBC, is particularly a type of mineral formation that tends to be more common either where there's nickel deposits or asbestos deposits. And most of their work is being done in Australia. So so there's lots of other solutions that we need. We need a basket of solutions, not just one. Thank you.
Yeah, and I agree, Shannon. Yeah, again, and it really does depend on the mineral deposit, the type. So again, generally speaking, the current technology related to binding carbon up in rock doesn't work for us, but that just means there's a chance for another technology to potentially come to the fore. So
I always learn so much from these conversations. Thanks, Al. If there are no other comments or questions for Al.
Yeah, and again, they could be biological, they could be technical, right? You could make different use of carbon. So, but yes, the industry and most industries are going to continue to have a challenge with how they produce heat. Our other option is to go small modular reactor as a source of heat in a big picture potentially. But yeah, we will need a variety of solutions if we are able to successfully capture carbon to how we sequester it or how we could use it.
Last question from Maggie in the chat. Are the CO2 emissions concentrated in stack gases? You could
yes.
chime in.
Yeah. Largely they come from dryers and boilers, and they're actually quite clean, as natural as carbon capture sources go, quite clean sources of CO2.
Great. Thanks, Joe. Moving right along, I'm going to pitch to Jen.
Great.
Last but not least, you could share about your challenge and also a little bit about your background. That'd be great.
Yeah, well, thanks, Shay. My name is Jan Smit. My background is process metallurgy. I'm trained in mining engineering, specialization in metallurgy, and I work with Sherritt International, and our specialty is hydrometallurgy, especially high temperature, high pressure hydrometallurgy and nickel and cobalt refining. I've worked across Europe, Africa, South America, and now North America in multiple commodities, in projects, operations, and technology development stroke innovation. And the challenge I want to pose to the audience is the challenge of speed. Whenever we speak with third parties, they want nickel and they want it fast. They want lots of nickel, they want it in 2 years or 3 years, and such a project timeline doesn't exist. As Liz was referring to, she tries to make things small and compact and modular. Big nickel projects are slow They are complex and they are expensive. So what we need is fast, simple, and cheap nickel projects that produce nickel for the battery industry. Now, the largest resource base of nickel in the world is based in what we call nickel laterites. Nickel laterites can be imagined as a clay mesh that sticks to your clothes and will never be washed out again. It has got a very high moisture content. It is rather refractory. It is clayey, and it is very impermeable. Now, the simplest technology that is known in metallurgy is heap leaching. Heap leaching has been tried on nickel laterites and is currently being tried on nickel laterites, and only in niche applications has it been successful. Because, as you can guess, a clayey impermeable mesh doesn't allow heap leach solutions to percolate through. Now, this technology has proven itself in gold and copper, where the rock is competent and hard and can be stacked up to great stack heights and maintain permeability and liquor flow for very, very long times. Heap leaching is very scalable. It would allow relatively small operations, like has been alluded to before, to come into operation quickly with simple technology and produce simple intermediate products that could be refined in places like what we operate ourselves. The key problem, therefore, is permeability. What has been tried in the past is to pelletize these nickel laterites, and there are some very funny war stories that will never be written up officially, where people have tried to pelletize nickel laterites, made a beautiful heap, started irrigating the heap with their leach solution, and before the day is over, the beautiful heap of pellets is turned into an impermeable pack of clay. So what I want to challenge the audience with is to think of alternative ways to convert a clay material in a permeable mass. So the requirements are permeability for a given extended period of time. It needs to be able to handle flow of an acidic solution. It needs to be at a reasonable height, and it needs to be cheap. What has been done to try and achieve this in the past has been, for example, reinforcing the material with things like straw or rock particulates. But an alternative way to think about this could also be, why don't we do pelletization in reverse, as it were? We could create a reticular structure by incorporating gas bubbles, air bubbles, that in effect would be the pelletized air, if you will. I've tried that in the past in the laboratory, and it worked brilliantly. It gave a permeable mass for 5 minutes. So there is some indication that we can create permeability in a non-conventional way. This requires clay science, this requires innovative thinking, this requires a very pragmatic approach. So that is my challenge. Create clay material permeability so that we can do large-scale, cheap nickel extraction on the greatest and most abundant resource of nickel on the planet, nickel laterites.
Thanks, Jan. If there are questions for Jan, please chime in the chat. Shannon, feel free to chime in. You noted a couple examples of, so you framed it too when we talked before about like the simplest tech that's applied to other commodities, and then you noted that one example in the lab. Can you speak, just so I'm hearing like it didn't last, it lasted for 5 minutes. Can you share again and repeat, like, why are these other solutions not working, or what's particularly off?
A key problem is that the laterite material is very clayey, and it got a very high moisture content. It is very common to find materials with a 30% free moisture content, and they will look pretty solid. So you can boil them in a pelletizing drum, and they may even retain their shape for a while, but the moment you start irrigating them, they just collapse. There are more niche ore types that do allow this, that have some physical strength in them, and that allow the classical heap leach approach that we use in copper or gold. But they are really exceptional cases. They are not mainstream.
And then I'm also hoping to hear, like, can you speak to the intensity of the problem? Like, as you noted, this is a pretty common, like, people want nickel, they want it fast, they want it, and especially given the transition before us, and nickel being so core. Can you speak to the kind of like intensity of the problem, and also like, what's the value of it being addressed, just to give us a sense of scope here?
Well, I think as everybody in the audience knows, nickel and cobalt are not exactly cheap, and their costs are an impediment in widespread adoption of, for example, electrical vehicles. We know that a Tesla is not cheap. It is not the normal person in the street that will be able to buy a Tesla, especially the higher end Teslas. So if we could make nickel and cobalt cheaper, we need a step change in extraction cost. And the speed with which the world wants to decarbonize and adopt things like electrical vehicles demands an immense ramp up in the production of class 1 nickel. Class 1 is the high purity nickel that you require for the battery chemistries of today. So it is the speed, it is the cost, and it is also the scale, the complexity of these projects that just don't match with the expectations of the decarbonization ramp up.
Yeah, and I have a question that's sort of at the periphery and actually touches on some of the work that Liz is involved in. As you were describing this issue around clay material permeability, the first thing that came to mind was the disaster in Brazil, where the tailing pond liquefied, the barrier of the tailing pond liquefied, and then there was a mass casualty event. Can you describe if these kinds of deposits that tend to have these characteristics, are they at risk when they go to the end of life closure piece, that you have to be very careful of those materials? Is that another aspect of innovation that we need to be aware of?
That could be an aspect of innovation, although nickel laterites are extremely well known to have low physical strength. So in nickel laterites, you won't get the type of the scale and height of tailings dams that you get in iron ores. It was an extremely tragic accident, of course, in Brazil, but in nickel laterites, it is well known that you don't even have to try to make a tailings dam like that, because it will not work. So the approach is quite different there. And therefore the tailings dam areas in nickel laterites are obviously also far greater. So if you want to look at it from an aesthetic point of view, if it were possible to dry stack laterite tailings, that would allow us to go to the more aggressive, higher heaps of tailings, which would have a lower footprint in the landscape.
Absolutely.
Everything is nowadays about carbon footprint, but personally, I also like trees and animals very, very much. So the more space for them, the better.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for providing that context.
Oh, everybody's reappeared. I bet you got cut off. That conversation wasn't long enough, but thanks for starting it at least. I believe my team's going to share links to how you can find our wonderful speakers online, and perhaps in follow-up, if they're open to it, we can share their contact info, but no pressure. Liz, Al, and Jan, thanks so much for joining us today. I know you're all very busy. We appreciate it. And Shannon, of course, entrepreneurship at UBC, and Rob, who I think has left already, thanks to NRC IRAP. We have our next edition coming up in about a month, March 22nd, 11 to 12 Pacific time. We're going to focus on energy, and you'll see speakers being announced very soon. So with that, thanks so much for joining us. Fast-paced event, but yeah, we appreciate you joining. and there's a little poll as you end.